What if the person comforting you at your spouse's funeral was actually their killer? Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you would never suspect them of betrayal? Have you witnessed family secrets that made you question everything you thought you knew? Maybe you have felt that unsettling moment when a loving gesture suddenly feels wrong, when comfort becomes suspicion, when grief transforms into something much darker. Today, I am bringing you a story that will shatter every assumption you have about family loyalty and trust. This is not just another tale of deception. This is about a widower and his sister-in-law who met in secret just 48 hours after burying the woman they both claimed to love. What happened in that hotel room will leave you questioning every family gathering, every shared glance, every whispered conversation you have ever witnessed. Welcome to Willowbrook, a town that prided itself on being the kind of place where neighbors knew each other, where tragedies brought communities together, and where nothing truly shocking ever happened. Helena Foster was the heart of this community, a beloved elementary school teacher whose warm smile could brighten any day. When her car veered off the winding road on that fateful autumn evening, the entire town mourned together. But grief has a way of revealing hidden truths. At Helena's funeral, something felt wrong. The mourners noticed it first, in the stolen glances between Victor Foster, the devastated widower, and Maris Dalton, Helena's estranged younger sister. There was an intimacy in their shared looks that transcended normal family comfort, something that spoke of secrets, of guilt, of plans made in shadows. 2 days later, Victor checked into the Willowbrook Inn under a false name. Maris arrived wearing a disguise, slipping through the lobby like a woman running from her own conscience. What they discussed behind closed doors would expose a web of betrayal involving insurance money, deadly sedatives, and tampered brake lines. The truth about Helena Foster's death was far more calculated than anyone imagined. If this story already has you questioning who you can trust, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything? Because what I am about to reveal will make you realize that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who sit beside you at the funeral, holding your hand while hiding their guilt. Helena Foster was everything a small town could ask for in a neighbor. For 12 years, she had taught 3rd grade at Willowbrook Elementary, where children would run to hug her in the hallways, and parents would thank her for going beyond the curriculum to truly care about their little ones. Her classroom walls were covered with thank you cards from former students, now grown adults, who still remembered the teacher who believed in them when no one else did. She lived in a modest 2-story house on Oak Avenue with her husband Victor, a quiet man who worked as an insurance adjuster. To everyone who knew them, they seemed like the perfect couple. Helena would tend to her garden every morning before school, while Victor would wave goodbye from their front porch, coffee mug in hand. On weekends, they could be seen walking hand in hand through downtown Willowbrook, stopping to chat with friends and neighbors who genuinely adored them both. But perfection, as we all know, is often just an illusion waiting to shatter. Victor Foster had gentle eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world, even before tragedy struck his life. He was the type of man who spoke softly, listened carefully, and never raised his voice in anger. When Helena died in that car accident on the winding road leading out of town, Victor's grief was so profound that neighbors worried he might never recover. His shoulders hunched with sorrow, his hands trembled when he tried to speak, and those gentle eyes became pools of devastation that nobody could bear to look at for too long. The funeral was held on a crisp Tuesday morning in October at St. Mark's Chapel, the small stone church where Helena and Victor had been married 8 years earlier. The pews were packed with mourners dressed in black, their faces etched with the kind of raw emotion that comes from losing someone who touched every life she encountered. But among the sea of grieving faces, One person stood out for all the wrong reasons. Maris Dalton had not set foot in Willowbrook for nearly 3 years. Helena's younger sister had always been the rebel of the family, with wild auburn hair that she refused to tame, and a defiant posture that announced her disdain for small-town expectations. While Helena had chosen stability and teaching, Maris had fled to the city, chasing dreams that never quite materialized and relationships that always seemed to end in disaster. Her return for the funeral shocked everyone who remembered the bitter argument that had driven her away. Nobody talked openly about what had caused the rift between the sisters, but the tension was obvious to anyone who watched them interact during family gatherings. Now dressed in an expensive black dress that seemed out of place in humble Willowbrook, Maris sat 3 rows behind Victor, her green eyes fixed not on the casket but on the back of her brother-in-law's head. Ruth McKinley, Helena's closest friend and fellow teacher, noticed something troubling during the service. She had positioned herself where she could watch over Victor, wanting to offer comfort to the man who had lost his anchor in life. But what she saw instead made her stomach twist with unease. Throughout the entire service, Victor and Maris kept exchanging glances, not the kind of shared grief you might expect from family members, but something more intimate, more secretive. When Victor would turn slightly to wipe his eyes, his gaze would find Maris. When Maris would adjust her position in the pew, her eyes would lock with his. There was a language being spoken between them that had nothing to do with mourning a beloved sister and wife. Ruth had taught kindergarten for 25 years before moving up to 3rd grade. She knew how to read the silent communications between people, the guilty looks that children gave when they thought nobody was watching. What she witnessed between Victor and Maris felt exactly like that, except these were not children caught in some innocent mischief. After the service ended and the mourners filed out to the cemetery, Ruth watched as Victor and Maris walked separately, but somehow in coordination, always maintaining just enough distance to avoid suspicion, while never losing sight of each other. When well-meaning friends approached Victor with condolences, Maris would hang back, waiting. When relatives tried to speak with Maris about her long absence from the family, she would deflect their questions while keeping Victor in her peripheral vision. The burial ceremony was brief, as Helena had requested in her will. As dirt was thrown onto the polished wooden casket, Victor broke down completely, his shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from the deepest parts of his soul. Maris moved toward him then, her hand reaching out to comfort him, but there was something in that gesture that made Ruth's skin crawl. It was too familiar, too practiced, too much like the touch of someone who had provided comfort many times before. But what Ruth did not know was that the real shock was still 48 hours away. Thursday evening, just 48 hours after Helena Foster was laid to rest, a man calling himself Martin Cole walked into the lobby of the Willowbrook Inn. The hotel sat on the quiet outskirts of town, the kind of place where traveling salesmen stayed when they could not afford the fancier accommodations downtown. It was modest, anonymous, and perfect for someone who did not want to be recognized. But Martin Cole was not a traveling salesman. Martin Cole was Victor Foster, and the fact that he was using a false name should have been the first red flag for anyone paying attention. The desk clerk, a middle-aged woman named Dorothy, who had worked at the inn for 15 years, remembered the transaction clearly. The man paid for the room in cash, which was unusual but not unheard of. He kept his head down when he signed the register, and his handwriting looked rushed, almost nervous. He requested a room on the 2nd floor, away from the main entrance, and specifically asked for something quiet where he would not be disturbed. Room 207 was exactly what he wanted. Located at the end of a narrow hallway, it was the kind of space that felt isolated from the rest of the world. The room itself was unremarkable. A single bed, with a faded floral bedspread, A small wooden table with 2 chairs, heavy curtains that blocked most of the natural light, and a window that looked out onto an empty parking lot. It was not romantic. It was not comfortable. And it certainly was not the kind of place where an innocent family meeting would take place. At exactly 6 o'clock in the evening, another figure appeared in the hotel lobby. This time it was a woman wearing a long dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows across her face. She moved quickly through the small lobby, avoiding eye contact with Dorothy at the front desk, and headed straight for the staircase leading to the 2nd floor. Dorothy watched from behind her counter as the woman climbed the stairs, her heels clicking against the worn carpet. There was something familiar about her walk, something about the way she carried herself, but the disguise made it impossible to be certain who she was. What Dorothy did know was that the woman went directly to room 207, without hesitation, as if she knew exactly where she was going. Inside the cramped hotel room, Victor paced near the grimy window, while Maris sat on the edge of the unmade bed. The air felt thick with tension, as if the very walls were pressing in on them. Neither of them had spoken for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts about what they were about to discuss. Maris clutched a time-worn envelope in her hands, her knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. The envelope was sealed, but it had been opened and resealed so many times that the edges were frayed and the adhesive barely held. Whatever was inside had been read multiple times, studied, analyzed and worried over until the paper was soft from handling. Finally, Maris broke the silence. "We should not be here, not now," she whispered, her voice carrying a mixture of fear and urgency that made the small room feel even more claustrophobic. Victor stopped pacing and turned to face her, his gentle eyes now hardened with something that looked dangerously close to desperation. "Secrets do not vanish with death, Maris. They only fester and grow until they destroy everything we have left. We must resolve what Helena left unfinished, or we will both pay the price." The envelope contained a letter written by Helena just 5 days before her death. Her handwriting was shaky, as if she had been upset or frightened when she wrote it. The words on the page carried an unsettling sense of foreboding, as if Helena had somehow sensed that her time was running out. Victor read the letter aloud, his voice breaking as he recited Helena's final concerns. She had written about mounting debts that threatened to destroy their comfortable life in Willowbrook. She mentioned promises made in desperation to people who could not be trusted. Most disturbing of all, she expressed a growing fear that someone close to her was hiding dangerous secrets, secrets that could hurt innocent people if they ever came to light. Pause the video right here. What do you think was in that envelope? Drop your theories in the comments below. As Victor finished reading, Maris began to cry, not the gentle tears of grief that had fallen at the funeral, but the harsh, ugly sobs of someone drowning in guilt. "I never wanted this," she pleaded, her voice barely audible above her weeping. "I was only trying to protect what we had built together. I thought if we could just buy more time, we could find another way." Victor set the letter down on the small wooden table and moved closer to where Maris sat. "If we do not act now, everything will crumble. The house, the insurance money, our future together. You know what is at stake here. You know what we stand to lose if the truth comes out." Their conversation grew more heated as the minutes passed. Maris spoke of mounting financial pressure that had driven them to consider measures they never thought possible. Victor talked about debts to dangerous people who would not wait much longer for payment. Both of them referenced events from the final days of Helena's life, moments when they had crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. While neither of them spoke directly about causing Helena's death, the weight of their guilt filled every corner of that small hotel room. They talked about timing, about opportunities, about the need to appear innocent while covering their tracks. They discussed the insurance policy that would solve their financial problems, the investigation that they needed to avoid, and the story they would tell if anyone started asking the wrong questions. In that suffocating space, with heavy curtains blocking out the world, two people who had claimed to love Helena Foster revealed themselves to be capable of betrayal beyond imagination. Ruth McKinley had spent 28 years teaching children, and in all that time she had developed an instinct for when something was not right. Children could not hide their guilt the way adults thought they could. There were always tells, always little signs that revealed the truth beneath the surface. As she watched Victor and Maris at Helena's funeral, every one of those instincts started screaming that something was terribly wrong. The day after the burial, Ruth could not shake the feeling that she had witnessed something important. She kept replaying those exchanged glances, the way Victor and Maris had moved around each other with such careful coordination. It felt like watching a performance, like seeing two actors who had rehearsed their roles but had not quite perfected their timing. Ruth had been Helena's closest friend for over a decade. They had taught in adjoining classrooms, shared lunch breaks, and confided in each other about everything from difficult students to marriage troubles. If Helena had been having problems with Victor, Ruth would have known. If Helena had been worried about money or family issues, Ruth would have been the first person she turned to for advice. But Helena had not said anything. In fact, during their last conversation just 3 days before the accident, Helena had seemed unusually quiet, almost distracted. When Ruth had asked if everything was okay, Helena had simply smiled and said she was dealing with some family matters that would work themselves out soon. Now, watching Victor and Maris at the funeral, Ruth wondered if those family matters had been more serious than Helena had let on. Ruth decided to pay closer attention to what was happening in her small town. She started taking evening walks that happened to lead her past Victor's house on Oak Avenue. She began shopping at the grocery store at times when she might run into Maris, who was staying at the old family home on Elm Street while she handled Helena's affairs. On Thursday evening, Ruth was walking past the Willowbrook Inn when she saw Maris hurrying across the parking lot. The younger woman was wearing a dark coat and hat that seemed designed to hide her identity, moving quickly toward the hotel entrance like someone who did not want to be seen. Ruth found a position behind a large oak tree where she could watch the building without being noticed. 20 minutes later, she saw Maris emerge from the hotel, looking around nervously before walking quickly back to her car. But what caught Ruth's attention was not just Maris's suspicious behavior. It was the fact that another car remained in the parking lot, a car that looked exactly like Victor's sedan. The next morning, Ruth called the hotel and asked to speak with the manager about a possible teaching conference that might be held there in the spring. During the conversation, she casually asked about their guest records from Thursday evening. The manager mentioned that they had hosted a Mr. Martin Cole in room 207 and that he had paid cash for his stay. Ruth knew Victor's middle name was Martin, and she knew his mother's maiden name was Cole. Determined to learn more, Ruth began following Maris during her daily activities. She discovered that Maris had been visiting the town's small legal office, the bank where Helena and Victor kept their accounts, and most interesting of all, she had been spending time at Helena's house when Victor was not there. One rainy evening, Ruth positioned herself outside the Willowbrook Inn again, this time with a small digital recorder she had borrowed from the school's audio-visual department. She managed to get close enough to the building to capture fragments of conversation coming from an open window on the second floor. The voices were muffled, but she clearly heard phrases that made her blood run cold. Someone mentioned insurance money and fatal missteps. Another voice talked about the need for a cover-up and worried about what people might discover. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. While helping to clean out Helena's classroom, Ruth found a crumpled piece of paper that had been torn from a larger note. The handwriting was Helena's, but the words were addressed to someone else. The fragment read, "Maris, our sins will never fade." Ruth took the torn note directly to the police station, along with her recordings and her observations about the suspicious hotel meetings. Detective James Morrison, who had been treating Helena's death as a straightforward traffic accident, suddenly found himself looking at a much more complex situation. The police reopened their investigation immediately. They requested Helena's medical records and ordered a more thorough examination of the autopsy results. What they discovered changed everything about the case. The toxicology report revealed traces of sedatives in Helena's bloodstream at levels far exceeding any therapeutic doses. The drugs were powerful enough to cause drowsiness, confusion, and significantly impaired driving ability. Helena had not been prescribed any medication that matched what was found in her system. Financial records painted an even more troubling picture. Victor stood to receive nearly $200,000 from Helena's life insurance policy, money that would easily cover the mounting debts that had been hidden from most of their friends and neighbors. The insurance had been increased just 6 weeks before Helena's death, a change that required both signatures but had been processed without Helena's usual careful review of financial documents. Phone records showed multiple calls between Victor and Maris in the weeks leading up to Helena's death, calls that had never been mentioned to anyone investigating the accident. Bank statements revealed cash withdrawals that corresponded with the dates of their secret hotel meetings. Most damning of all, a forensic examination of Helena's car revealed subtle signs of tampering with the brake lines. The damage was not immediately obvious, which explained why the initial accident investigation had not detected it. But under closer inspection, it became clear that someone with mechanical knowledge had deliberately weakened the braking system. Ruth McKinley, the quiet third-grade teacher who just wanted to honor her friend's memory, had uncovered evidence of a carefully planned murder. The news hit Willowbrook like a lightning strike on a clear day. Within hours of Detective Morrison announcing that Helena Foster's death was now being investigated as a potential homicide, the quiet town transformed into something unrecognizable. Neighbors who had lived peacefully side by side for decades suddenly found themselves whispering behind closed doors, questioning everything they thought they knew about the people they trusted. The local coffee shop, which had always been a place for friendly morning conversations, became a battleground of speculation and accusation. Some residents refused to believe that Victor Foster, the gentle insurance adjuster who had never raised his voice in anger, could be capable of murdering his beloved wife. Others pointed to the mounting evidence and wondered how they could have been so blind to what was happening right under their noses. Martha Henderson, who lived 2 houses down from the Fosters, told anyone who would listen that she had always sensed something was not quite right about Victor. She claimed to have heard raised voices coming from their house late at night, though she admitted she had never mentioned it to anyone before Helena's death. Her husband Robert disagreed completely, insisting that Victor was being framed by circumstances beyond his control. The divide in the community grew deeper when Detective Morrison called Victor in for questioning. Victor arrived at the police station on Friday morning, still dressed in the black suit he had worn to comfort mourning neighbors all week. But instead of the broken widower that everyone expected to see, the man who sat across from Detective Morrison seemed strangely calm, almost resigned to whatever was about to happen. "Mr. Foster," Detective Morrison began, "we need to discuss your whereabouts on Thursday evening, 2 days after your wife's funeral." Victor's response was measured and careful. "I was at home, Detective, grieving the loss of my wife and trying to figure out how to move forward with my life." "That is interesting," Morrison replied, "because we have evidence that you checked into the Willowbrook Inn under the name Martin Cole. Would you like to explain why you used a false identity?" For the first time since entering the interrogation room, Victor's composure cracked slightly. His hands trembled as he reached for the water glass in front of him, and his voice became barely audible when he spoke. "I needed privacy, detective. The constant stream of visitors and phone calls was overwhelming. I thought a night away from the house would help me process my grief." "And did this processing of grief involve meeting with your sister-in-law, Maris Dalton?" Victor's silence stretched for nearly 2 minutes. He stared at his hands, his breathing shallow and uneven, as if the weight of everything he had been carrying was finally becoming too heavy to bear. When he finally looked up, his eyes held a haunted quality that made Detective Morrison uncomfortable. "I want to speak with a lawyer," Victor said quietly. Meanwhile, in a separate interrogation room, Maris Dalton was having a very different conversation with Detective Sarah Chen. Unlike Victor's careful composure, Maris had been crying since the moment she was brought in for questioning. Her auburn hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and her hands shook so violently that she could barely hold the tissue box that had been placed in front of her. "Maris," Detective Chen said gently, "we know you met with Victor at the hotel on Thursday night. We have evidence of your presence there, and we have recordings of conversations that suggest you both knew more about Helena's death than you have admitted." Maris's response was immediate and devastating. "It was not supposed to happen like this," she sobbed, her words tumbling out in a rush of guilt and desperation. "We never meant for anyone to get hurt. We just needed more time to fix everything." "Fix what, Maris? What needed to be fixed?" "The money," she whispered, her voice so quiet that Detective Chen had to lean forward to hear her. "Helena found out about the debts, about the people Victor owed money to. She was going to leave him, going to expose everything. We could not let that happen." "So what did you do?" Maris looked up at Detective Chen with red-rimmed eyes that held more pain than any person should have to carry. "I loosened the brake lines on her car, just enough to make it seem like an accident. Victor gave her the pills beforehand, told her they were for her headaches. We thought she would just run off the road gently, maybe break a leg or something that would keep her in the hospital long enough for us to figure out another solution. But she died. Maris, Helena died because of what you did." The sound that came from Maris then was not quite human. It was the raw, primal cry of someone whose entire world had collapsed around them. "I know," she managed between sobs. "I have to live with that for the rest of my life. But you have to understand, we were desperate. The people Victor owed money to were threatening to hurt Helena if we did not pay them back. We thought we were protecting her." This is where everything falls apart. Make sure you are subscribed, because the conclusion will shock you. Back in the main police station, word of Maris's confession spread quickly among the officers and staff. The revelation that Helena Foster had been murdered by her own husband and sister sent shockwaves through the small department, but it was the casual way that Maris described tampering with the brakes that truly horrified everyone who heard it. Detective Morrison returned to Victor's interrogation room with new information and a very different approach. "Your sister-in-law has confessed to loosening the brake lines on Helena's car, Mr. Foster. She has also told us about the sedatives you gave Helena before she left the house that evening. Would you like to revise your earlier statement?" Victor's reaction was not what anyone expected. Instead of denying the allegations or demanding proof, he simply nodded slowly and closed his eyes. "How long do I have before you arrest me?" he asked. "That depends on what you tell us now," Morrison replied. "I gave Helena the pills," Victor admitted, his voice hollow and distant. "I told her they would help with the stress headaches she had been having. I knew Maris was going to tamper with the car. We planned it together, but we never intended for her to die. We thought the accident would be minor, that she would be hospitalized for a few weeks, while we sorted out our financial problems. But you knew there was a risk. Yes, Victor whispered. We knew there was a risk. The weight of circumstantial evidence, combined with Maris's confession and Victor's admission, created a case that would haunt Willowbrook for years to come. Two people who had claimed to love Helena Foster had conspired to hurt her in the most unthinkable way, and their desperation had led to a tragedy that could never be undone. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in February, just 4 months after Helena Foster had been laid to rest. The Willowbrook County Courthouse had never seen anything like the crowds that gathered outside its doors. Residents who had lived peaceful lives for decades found themselves camping out overnight to secure seats in the gallery, desperate to witness justice for the woman who had taught their children and touched their hearts. Inside the packed courtroom, the atmosphere was electric with tension and grief. Helena's former students, now adults with children of their own, sat alongside parents who remembered her gentle guidance through difficult times. The front rows were filled with teachers from Willowbrook Elementary, their faces etched with the kind of pain that comes from losing not just a colleague, but a friend who represented everything good about their profession. Judge Margaret Williams presided over the proceedings with firm dignity, understanding that this case had torn apart a community that desperately needed healing. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Thomas Reed, presented a clear timeline of events that painted Victor and Maris as desperate conspirators who had chosen murder over facing their financial responsibilities. Victor's defense attorney argued that his client had never intended to kill Helena, that the plan had been to cause a minor accident that would buy them time to resolve their debts. But the jury saw through these excuses when presented with evidence of the tampered brake lines, the excessive sedatives, and the secret hotel meetings. 12 ordinary citizens reached a unanimous conclusion about what had really happened on that autumn evening. Maris received a sentence of 8 years for her cooperation with prosecutors and her obvious remorse. Her tearful testimony about loosening the brake lines had been crucial in securing Victor's conviction, and the judge acknowledged her willingness to accept responsibility for her actions. Still, 8 years felt inadequate to many who watched her leave the courtroom in handcuffs, knowing that Helena would never teach another child or share another laugh with her friends. Victor's fate was harsher and more final. The jury convicted him of second-degree manslaughter, finding that while he may not have intended to kill his wife, his reckless actions had directly caused her death. Judge Williams sentenced him to 25 years in prison, noting that the betrayal of trust made his crime particularly heinous. As the gavel fell and Victor was led away in shackles, the courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief and continued grief. Justice had been served, but it could not bring Helena back or heal the wounds that her murder had inflicted on everyone who loved her. Ruth McKinley sat in the back of the courtroom, watching as the man she had helped convict disappeared through the defendant's door. Her victory felt hollow and bittersweet. She had honored Helena's memory by ensuring that her killers faced consequences, but the cost had been enormous. Friendships had been destroyed, trust had been shattered, and the peaceful community she had called home for 30 years would never feel safe again. The aftermath stretched far beyond the courthouse walls. Victor began serving his sentence at a maximum security facility 3 hours away from Willowbrook, where he would spend the next 2 decades contemplating the choices that had destroyed his life. Letters from former friends stopped coming after the first year, and visits from family members became increasingly rare as time passed. Maris served her 8 years in a women's correctional facility downstate, but her real punishment began after her release. She moved to a distant city where nobody knew her name or her history, working minimum wage jobs and living in anonymous apartment buildings where neighbors never asked questions about the past. The weight of guilt followed her everywhere, a constant reminder of the sister she had betrayed and the life she had destroyed. Helena's grave in Willowbrook Cemetery became an unexpected symbol of the cost of betrayal. Fresh flowers appeared regularly, left by former students, fellow teachers, and community members who wanted to honor her memory. The headstone bore a simple inscription: "Beloved teacher, faithful friend, taken too soon." But everyone who visited understood the deeper truth it represented. Trust, once broken, leaves scars that never fully heal. The case taught Willowbrook several painful lessons that residents would carry for generations. They learned that financial desperation can corrupt even the most trusted relationships, that family bonds offer no protection against greed and fear. They discovered that secrets have a way of surfacing no matter how carefully they are hidden, and that communities must remain vigilant against the dangers that can lurk behind familiar faces. Most importantly, they learned that trust must be balanced with wisdom, that loving someone completely does not mean ignoring warning signs or dismissing instincts that something is wrong. Years have passed since Victor Foster was led away in handcuffs, and Maris Dalton disappeared into anonymity, but Willowbrook has never returned to the innocent place it once was. The town that once prided itself on neighborly trust and open doors now carries the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Residents still wave to each other across garden fences, but they pay closer attention to the conversations they overhear and the relationships that seem too perfect to be real. The local coffee shop still buzzes with morning conversation, but the topics have changed. Where people once discussed weather and school events, they now share stories about warning signs they wish they had recognized sooner. Parents teaching their children about stranger danger have expanded those lessons to include the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones we trust completely. Helena Foster's story has become more than just a tragic chapter in Willowbrook's history. It has evolved into a cautionary tale that gets passed down from longtime residents to newcomers, from parents to children, from teachers to students. The details have been polished through countless retellings, but the core message remains unchanged. Appearances can deceive, financial pressure can corrupt, and family loyalty has limits that nobody wants to discover. The elementary school where Helena taught has established an annual safety awareness program in her honor. Third-grade teachers, the position Helena held for 12 years, now receive additional training in recognizing signs of domestic distress and financial crisis among their colleagues. The program serves as a living memorial to a woman whose death taught an entire community about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. Helena's inadvertent legacy extends far beyond the borders of her small town. Her story has been shared in teacher training workshops, community safety seminars, and family counseling sessions as an example of how quickly trusted relationships can turn deadly when desperation takes hold. The case study appears in criminal justice textbooks as a perfect example of how financial pressure and family secrets can create the perfect storm for tragedy. Ruth McKinley, now retired from teaching, has become an unofficial guardian of Helena's memory and the lessons her death provided. She speaks regularly at community events about the importance of trusting instincts, asking difficult questions, and never assuming that love automatically guarantees safety. Her message is not one of paranoia, but of healthy awareness, encouraging people to maintain caring relationships while staying alert to changes that might signal danger. What is the most shocking family betrayal you have ever witnessed? Share your story in the comments. And if this case taught you something about trust, hit that subscribe button for more true crime stories that will make you question everything you think you know about the people closest to you. The truth about human nature is both humbling and hopeful. We are all capable of great love and terrible betrayal. Sometimes within the same relationship, the cost of hidden desires and unspoken desperation can be measured not just in lives lost, but in communities forever changed, and trust that takes generations to rebuild. Yet there is hope in awareness, strength in vigilance, and wisdom in the painful lessons that tragedies like Helena's provide. When we understand that even the gentlest eyes can hide desperate secrets, we become better equipped to protect ourselves and those we love from the darkness that can lurk behind familiar faces.